The last session of the day. We will have a presentation now by Pascal Hakim from IDG. It's rough edges of the Drupal dream. We're going to have questions at the end. If you can just remember to speak your questions into the microphone so we can pick it up on the audio, that'd be great. Thanks a lot. Please make Pascal feel welcome. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Well, thanks for coming. And yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask for the microphone first and go for it. So, yeah, what's this talk about? Basically, we are I work for IDG, which is a web publisher. We've been using Drupal since probably about 2007. And what I want to really talk about is things that we did wrong that ended up with us now basically having given up on Drupal. We're still using it in some places, but those are rapidly shrinking. And unfortunately, within IDG at least, we've created a bad name for Drupal with the events that have happened. So, I mean, we learned a lot out of it. I hope that you can at least learn a little bit out of it too. And yeah, hopefully this will be helpful for some of you. So to give you an idea of where we are now, we've gone from being almost entirely Drupal-based for our websites to having, I would say, less than 2% of our pages now being driven out of Drupal. So firstly, a little bit about me. I work at IDG Australia, which is a publisher that specializes in IT. We do a bunch of magazines, websites, and events that you may have heard of. We do things like PC World and Computer World. We used to do things like GamePro, which you may also have heard of. In Australia, we are mostly website-based now, with other things around still to run events and so on. And within IDG in Australia, my team takes care of everything that is technology-related. So the websites definitely fall into our tasks. So how did we actually get here? IDG has been having websites for quite a while. Since 1996, in fact, is the oldest I can find in archive.org. I obviously wasn't there back then. I was still in high school. But yeah, archive.org tells me that, so I'm going to believe it. In 2002, which was just after the dot-com crash that some of you may remember, we suddenly realized we were spending a whole lot of money on really expensive CMSs and not getting a huge amount out of it. Now, we have a history of trying out things and seeing if they work. And at the time, things had crashed so badly that people were actually starting to question, is this internet thing actually going to stick around for us? So we decided at the time to really simplify things and move to something that was really simple, really cheap, that would keep us on the internet, and so that if it ever took off again, we'd be in a good position. And if it didn't work, then hey, it doesn't matter. We haven't had to make a really expensive investment in it. Now, at the time, I don't know if any of you remember 2002 and what was available in terms of CMSs back then, but there wasn't a huge amount, especially not in the open source world. So in the end, we ended up creating our own system from scratch. And we used that from 2002 up to about 2007, I would say, when we started moving to Drupal. So these days, we've got over 350,000 articles. It's getting close to 400,000 now. And they've been written by 12,000 authors. According to who you are, you're going to think this is either massive or absolutely tiny. There are publishers with substantially more. But hey, there's also a lot of people with substantially less content on their sites. So yeah, I've got a copy of the first commit there that is how far back the history I can see goes. And as you can see, it's 2002. Typical, the commit was at midnight. So it's obviously started well. Okay, so why did we pick Drupal? At the time, we were spending a lot of time creating just basic forms, to create content or update it or delete it, which was just a waste of everyone's time. Drupal just provided all of that for us, and we didn't have to do anything with it, so that was great for us. That's pretty telling, There's a module for that with pretty much anything you want to do in Drupal. and not having to create things from scratch and be able to reuse things was something that we really were excited about. At the same time, it was slow for us to make changes in our old system because everything was custom made. I've just shown you the first commit was made at midnight. That's a lot of code to carry. That's quite, can sometimes, if there's a bug in some of those places, it's hard to find. I have seen very few bugs in Drupal that are at that core admin level that would really make you lose sleep at night. When you're writing that code yourself, you have to worry about that. You can't leave it for someone else. So for us, that was another great thing. Our existing CMS was rooted in PHP, so moving to Drupal in PHP, heaps easy. And also, we wanted to give our journalists more flexibility. Obviously, because we have a bunch of people putting content in, they're always using it, they're always adding things in, and the easier we make things for them, the happier they are. And I don't know if any of you guys have talked to journalists, but they're usually grumpy at the best of times. So, yeah. Is it going to change? Okay, I'm going to make a quick little aside and talk about what's the point of IT, because a lot of the problems we have are really based down to this. Half of you will have seen something similar and will go, yeah, that's obvious. And the other half of you will be like me 4 years ago and go, man, this guy has no idea. So I'm going to talk about it anyway. Hopefully at least one of you will get something out of it. Now, there's three main things that you get that you expect an IT department to do. Some people only expect the first one. Some people expect the first and the second. Some people expect all three. If you are doing only the first one and your business expects the first two, you're going to have a disconnect somewhere. Similarly, if you want to provide all three and your business only wants the first one, you're also going to provide conflict in where you are. So the first one is what we call keeping the lights on. The only thing that people want your IT department to do is make sure the printer's got toner, make sure the websites haven't crashed, enough room on the file system. The more time, well, I don't especially find that quite interesting work to do, but it has to be done. And it's what allows, it's the base that you build everything on. Past that, you have, can the IT department be used to optimize the business and make things better? Sometimes they get totally twisted into building a massive ERP implementation because, hey, we're going to make everything better that way. But there is a lot that you can do to make things easier. As a programmer or someone who works on the websites, you know that you can see someone spending hours doing something and you can say, you know what, we can actually write something that's going to save you heaps of time. So that's the next level that you can go to. You won't be able to do that if you keep running out of space on the file server, because people are not going to want to be told, hey, I can save you time with this. They'll want the original prompts to be fixed. And finally, you can drive innovation. What I mean by that, rather than just using fancy buzzwords, is that usually when you work in IT, you get to talk to everyone, or at least they all want to talk to you. So you have a fairly good idea of what's going on, and that can help you realize that, we could actually launch a whole new website, build using this technology, and we could do this. At the moment, we can't do it at all. This is an easy project, and people don't necessarily know that that's even an option. So once you've gotten to that stage, and you can only move to the next stage by building trust and actually making sure that everything at that level is done. But these are really powerful things that you can do. So if you're not quite in line there, you're going to have issues. One of the problems that I would say we definitely had is that myself and my team were at one stage too busy keeping the lights on. And what I mean by that is with our custom CMS, we often had little problems that would crop up. Somebody would fix a bug somewhere, it would uncover a bug somewhere else. None of the original developers still worked at the company, so we couldn't even ask them any questions. In fact, they had both moved overseas just to make things extra little bit harder. So yeah, they couldn't really go any further actually. So that made it hard for us. And what really IDG wanted was for us to move to the next level. How can we make things better? And we were just too busy fixing bugs in editing code basically. All right, so how do we actually do the migration? I'm a huge fan of small projects. We actually ran both sites at the same time. Thanks to Drupal being open source and all the source code being there, we just started calling the Drupal code from inside our existing CMS. And we were able to pick a set of pages and go, okay, these ones can be done in Drupal now. And our existing CMS would just route through to Drupal, just loading PHP code, calling the, if you look at the starting file in Drupal, it's actually pretty easy to see what it does and to insert this into your own code. So that was quite helpful for us. This meant that instead of saying, okay, we're going to have a 6-month project, we're going to migrate everything, we really did it one thing at a time. So first, for example, we wanted slideshows to be done in Drupal. That was one project that took maybe a week. And then we had another one that we moved, and then another one, and then another one. The advantage of that is that you don't have many late nights all the time as things keep breaking, and you have that. We would pick what to do based pretty much entirely on what bugs needed to be fixed at any point in time. So if someone had issues somewhere, we'd go, let's move that particular module over. The other advantage out of this is that our original system had been built as a huge monolithic thing, and with moving things piece by piece out of into Drupal, we were able to actually put things into new distinct modules, which was really nice, because we started to be able to make some sense out of what existed there. We all discovered code that nobody knew existed. Again, the original developers had all left. And I'm quite happy to say that the only late night we ever had when we moved was the day where we moved the user system. That's always a hard one. And we did finish at midnight that night, but every single other day I left on time, so I was quite happy with that. No unplanned issues happening, really. Okay, so where did we actually run into issues? Views was one of the first places where we started having problems for us. When you're a publisher, you have a lot of content that's always going up. And we have worked out over the years some methods that we can use to make sure that what's on the page is actually what people want to see. For example, on a homepage of a website, of a news website, sorry, you have some information that you want up there right now, but you don't really want it to stay there a long time. Maybe, in Sydney, it's usually the Harbour Bridge has been closed, and then an hour later, hey, that's done, that's finished. That's no longer a lead story. Whereas on the technology side, we might have this is how you purchase a hosting. So this is how you make a contract with a hosting vendor for hosting your sites on. This is the sort of content that, really, people might want to see that for up to a week, let's say. So we always have to constantly rebalance this. And we have some methods that we've used, and putting that into views was turning into a big problem. In SQL, we had implemented it using a bunch of case statements, because that's the only way we had made it work. And yeah. Now, the other issue you have is that we have a split testing and deployed environment, and we were finding it really hard to really move those views across without causing things to break. It's very easy for offsets somewhere to get put off a little bit, and suddenly when you start moving rows from an SQL database into the live one, or if you try and reuse the admin, it gets complicated. At the same time, we had power users that we trusted, maybe a little foolishly, who, we have a lot of technical journalists. They're meant to know how to do a lot of these things. Some of them have even installed Drupal, themselves. Some of them might use Linux on their computers, so they are fairly technically literate people. And so we trusted some of them. And it's very easy to make a mistake in there that is then impossible to find. So that turned into an issue for us as well. And yeah, we found it really hard to actually figure out where the changes were coming from, why they were made, and so on. Because as soon as you've moved that sort of information to a database, relying on backups to pull that information out is a big pain. So in the end, we did the easier way out of this, which is we saved all the views to code and only ever used the code versions of views. That fixed the immediate problem we had, which is stopping issues that we didn't know where they came from. However, it meant that we've lost a huge advantage out of the Drupal system. Only a few select people were trusted to create views, and we really had to leave it at that. We couldn't risk having the wrong articles show up on the homepage or on section pages. If any of you read newspaper websites, you may have noticed sometimes something goes wrong and suddenly it's showing a page out of 2008, and that always creates a lot of angst within the company. I would say that people would prefer the website to be down rather than wrong stories to show up. If the website is down, we don't really lose anything out of it. Our money comes from advertisers, and as long as we can make do what we promised them we deliver over the month, they're happy. Readers are used to websites being down because, hey, it happens a lot. However, the wrong information being up there is quite bad for us. So, yeah, they're decisions we had to make. By saving it to disk, we suddenly had version control tracking again. But, you know, the great thing about Views is you can just go in there and click, and we're lost up. Okay, CCK. We only really started looking at that once, or at least seriously looking into it, once a bunch of our code had been moved to Drupal. And after our Views experience, we were too scared to go there. We are quite keen on having SQL tables that match the data, and I found that makes it really easy to debug things. When you have an SQL statement that's taking too long to run, it's really easy to debug when you have a separate table for everything, rather than having a big thing like the vocabulary in Drupal, where you can have 5 vocabularies, bunch of tags against it, but you have to remember, hang on, I'm on the development environment, and John created this vocabulary last week, and then he deleted it, and we haven't had time to update the dev environment back to the live, and now the offsets are off, and hang on, what was going on again? So CCK scared us because we thought if this same thing is going to happen for our actual data, we're never going to be able to find anything. So we ran away screaming. Okay, Multisite. Now, we have a bunch of websites. I mentioned before, we have Computer World, we have PC World, GamePro, Linux World, Tech World, a bunch of sites. And a lot of the stories can be on more than one site. Every site targets a different audience in theory. But for example, if we review a high-end laptop, then we're going to put that on the site for a consumer, but we might also put it on a website for IT managers or CIOs, because they probably want a MacBook Pro too. So that's the sort of article we can run in multiple places. We don't want the journalists to have to copy-paste the article into 3 CMSs, and when inevitably a mistake gets made, we don't want to have to go into 4 different systems to update again. So we really wanted to keep the system as, with one source of truth for articles. That meant using Multisite, we had to keep some tables shared. Nodes was the main one for that. Obviously, with the different look and feels that different sites had, things like the block, the menu, and the system tables, I don't know if you all know what they are, but they're the more configuration level options, we kept separate. And that allowed us to have different orders to boxes, show different things in different places. We kept everything in the same database as a result, and we had one code base. Having one code base is both great and terrible. We really liked the ability that we had when we wanted to update a module to just have it be updated everywhere. 4 sites wanted this, or 4 sites have this module, it's updated, it's everywhere, it's done, it's one thing. However, what would often happen with us is somebody would want a feature to go out maybe before it was quite ready. Maybe they needed it for a specific client, maybe they needed it for an event that was running so that it had to run. And what would happen is they were happy to leave with maybe a bug that existed, but the other business units within IDG may not have been so happy. So that started causing issues as well, where we had to start putting different bits of functionality in modules to make them work. And that really turned into a big mess. At the same time, because we were doing these splits, and there's a lot of pages on the Drupal page, on the Drupal site, which talk about how you can choose to do that. There's no correct solution. It depends on what you feel like doing, what you believe is the right thing. And there's a great comment on there somewhere that says, even a year after you've done it, you still want to know whether you made the right choice. And that's really what happened to us. Yeah. Now, one of the issues with this is that it can introduce really complicated or hard to find bugs. For example, our access table, which controls who can access what, sometimes loses data, and we still haven't figured out why. After spending quite a bit of time looking at it, I just fixed it with a cron job that just checks that what's meant to be there is there. It works for me. It may not work for others. The big issue you have with that sort of problem is that you can't really file a bug and say, so I modified the site in these 7 different ways, and now it doesn't work. Because the reaction you're going to get is, well, don't do it then. To use a bad car analogy, this is like letting down your tires and then going, yeah, the car doesn't steer right anymore. So I put a bit of concrete in the back tires just to, But now it's going really slowly as well. So, this is what was happening. One of the other issues you have with doing this as well is that you can get phantom modules. Site A knows about this module, but Site B doesn't. So when it's looking at its configuration, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. And that can start causing some issues. So I would be really careful of going down that path. However, you may not have the choice if you need to share data. So be aware of that. All right, caching. This is one of my favorite quotes. There are only 2 hard things in computer science: caching, validation, and naming things. Some people add an extra one to the end of that, which is an off by 1 bugs. But anyway, caching was an issue for us because as an IT publisher, you tend to have websites that don't have a wide audience. So everyone who comes to one of our sites and reads something is actually quite valuable to us. And it's important for us to do the right thing on there. We're not like one of those sites that you hear about that does 15 million pages a day where, they have to take a cut somewhere because that's the only way they can make it work. We're in a situation where, for example, we might promote some sponsored content on one of our sites. And if there's more than one, then you have to choose which order to display them in. Now, what typically happens is we don't want to have the argument with different people saying, oh, I should be first. No, I should be first. So you just randomize it. You say, I want it to come in whatever random order. But the second you tell somebody it's going to be in a random order, they're going to hit refresh on their browser when they're not first. And if they're not first, what are they going to do? Refresh again. Now, if you've cached that for 10 minutes, they're going to sit there hitting refresh for 10 minutes. And then maybe they'll come second the next time. So they'll keep sitting there, and then you're getting the phone call. It's not working. You told me it was random. I stood there for 20 minutes hitting refresh, and I was never at the top. Why is that? So that makes your caching really hard. Or it doesn't have to be hard, but it causes a lot of complexity in your caching system. The way we went around doing it was caching in usually 2 levels, where you have one set of caching that retrieves all the data you may want to show, and then just randomize those 10 links that might show up, for example, and then pick the first 5. That way, every time you hit refresh, something new comes up. These days, I would do it differently. I don't know if any of you have heard of Edge Site Includes, or ESI. ESI allows you to say, for these, so ESI is a bit of code that you'll put into your website, and you will tell it, when you want to display this, instead grab this other file. You normally have that logic of grab that other file, not within Drupal itself, but in a load balancer you have in front of your website. There's a bunch of existing ones that you can use for that. I recommend Varnish. You see it show up in the Drupal documentation as well. Varnish is really, really good. And I really wish that when we were having all the caching issues we were having in Drupal, Varnish was where it is now, because it can save you a lot of time. Varnish allows you to say something like, in your Drupal code, you only return a special code and then a random number between 1 and 5. And then it will hit your load balancer, and then the load balancer will get one of 5 URLs. It will cache those 5 URLs, which are your 5 lists in a different order. And then every time it loads, it will just show a new one. As cache expires, it gets a new one. Things change around, things move, which is what people expect. Okay, we want to show people what they expect. Otherwise, they get all upset. Thundering herds used to be a problem for us. That's when all your cache expires at the same time. I've noticed Drupal 7 has a lot more protection against that by adding random numbers. what typically happens is when you deploy your site, you clear the cache so that things don't go funny. And let's say your default cache timeout is 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, half your cache just expires again. People start browsing the site. 10 minutes later, cache expires again. Now, over time, it starts spreading out. However, what would happen with us is 2 hours later, someone would deploy again, restart the cycle. So that was an issue for us. The problem with thundering herds is that if you try and solve it yourself, you start messing with how the system expects cache to work. And but the big thing that really comes up with caching is that different problems need different strategies. For some people, if you're showing mining data, for example, it's really important for you to get that right. For me, the issues I have is it doesn't matter so much if a page is 10 minutes old, let's say. 2 years old, yes, big problem. 2 minutes, I can live without. So you have to use different strategies based on what you're trying to do. And that can be really hard to get done, especially when content starts getting updated and you have to invalidate the cache, which is this one here. Unlike many other CMSs, Drupal actually has a system to make that work, but it's a big, big hammer. And you can start feeling it. You see it in your caching server. If you use memcache, you can see when it's doing its thing. So caching is changing a lot in Drupal. We are still running on Drupal 6, and using Cache Router. In Drupal 7, it's been all split up into its own modules. Different people have different ideas as to how it should run. For example, there is a spin lock in memcache module in Drupal 7, which I really don't like. But it's the way you can ensure things are correct. I'd rather have things not be correct for a little bit, but not have that spin lock there. When one of my sites is on Slashdot and Google News at the same time, I have different priorities than having the exact data up to the minute. All right, designers. This was really unexpected for me. I thought designers would absolutely love Drupal because they would just be able to find everything. Turns out they couldn't. We've had 4 designers work in the time we're using Drupal, usually 2 at a time, and they all hated it. I can't explain why. Maybe we didn't go about the right way, or we didn't create our templates properly, but they found it really hard. Amusingly, our developers loved it. So our developers who used to never change CSS classes and just give broken display code out to designers to say, fix it, when they actually fix things themselves because they would go, oh, this is so easy, this is great. I wish we had had this all along. But the designers were finding it hard to modify things. We got into a situation at one stage where the designers had basically just given up and would give us HTML code and would say, this is what it's meant to look like. I don't know how to put that in Drupal. So a developer would have to slice it up and put it in the correct places, which sometimes isn't so bad when you've seen some of the code that designers can write. But it's an extra work for people that is not necessarily interesting. So that was a really big thing for us. When a designer tells you, oh, I'd love to fix that, but I'll just write some JavaScript that modifies it once a page has generated, so I don't have to modify things, that became a problem for us. Eventually they were all quite unhappy with that. So, yeah. Now, other things. One of the great things with migrating to Drupal was that it forced us to clean up our data. It forced us to create discrete modules that had each its own bit of functionality. We were able to find out things about our code that we had no idea about. And for maintaining things, that was great. We actually understood things that we had understood. We found bugs that realistically people had hit before, but we just couldn't explain it. And by slicing things up and seeing how something was implemented and then re-implementing it, we would say, oh, do you remember a year ago when this funny thing happened? That was this bug. So that was great. Personally, I'm still involved in Drupal sites. So while I've kind of given up on it at my current job, I'm still doing things in Drupal, and I'm just starting to help out someone else with a new one. So please don't take this to mean that I've given up on Drupal. It just wasn't appropriate for the situation I was faced in my work. And yeah, think really carefully if you're going to be modifying Drupal, because while sometimes you have to do it, it's a great way to land yourself in a world of pain. One of the problems with coming from a custom designed CMS is that people are used to be able to just modify anything whenever they feel like it, because there's no concept of upstream of this comes from over there. So some of the developers were good and would file tickets against Drupal. Sometimes they would send a patch, but for the other people, it just well, it's in a Drupal directory, so what? And that's something that we really wanted to avoid. Yeah. What would have made a difference? Now, these are just some generic things, but one of the things that we're really noticing now is that a lot of people are using Facebook, a lot of people are using Google Docs, and they expect the same functionality in every web app that they use. Autosave is part of it, but when you have multiple people editing a node at the same time, it's a hard problem. You can say, well, you take the changes from the last person to modify it, or you can say, block it so that if one person's modified it and then you go and hit save, it doesn't work. Or you can say when someone's opened it up, it locks it. All of these solutions have problems. I wish I had an answer for this. I don't. The way Google Docs does it is the only way I can see working. But that's quite hard to implement when you have custom data types, because everything needs to have a way of dealing with it. Typically what will happen with us is a person will go into an article when they notice a typo, and then at the same time another journalist will get an update on the story and will go to modify it. And we want both those changes. I don't really want to teach the journalists how to do revision controls, because that's not an easy one for developers at the best of times. And it's a problem for us. And the worst part is they're used to using Google Docs and saying, well, yeah, I just want to be able to see John's cursor in red and Andrew's cursor in blue, and then we can all modify the story at the same time. And I'm sure it'll work. Can you just make it happen, please? And that's a hard one. Same thing with autosave. I don't know why people forget to hit save, and I don't know what modules they're installing on their internet browsers that cause them to crash every 3 minutes, but they do. And they're the issues that we have. So again, there's some stuff. There's an autosave module in Drupal. I've never used it because, again, I'm scared of custom data types and what it means for those, for half the data to be saved and half the data to not be saved. It can be worse than none of the data being saved. All right. So I'm pretty much done here. Does anybody have any questions? And also, thank you for not throwing any rotten tomatoes at me.
Thanks. Yeah, so Pascal, you talk about not wanting to make changes to Drupal. Is the main change you made with views that you mentioned, or what were the main?
The view change that I mentioned actually is a module that you can use that allows you to save views as files that you then import into your revision control system. The changes we had were in things like the caching system. We want some things to be cached, some things to not be cached. We have a problem which I didn't really talk about with caching, but when you have over 300,000 items of content, you're going to have the Bing bot, the Google bot, the Baidu bot, and the Yahoo one, basically hitting you every second. If you're lucky, less than every second most of the time. So at any point in time, random pages are being grabbed. These are pages that sometimes haven't been called in a month. So we want to cache those. Separately too, at the same time, there's 3 stories on Slashdot today pointing to one of my sites, which has happened. Or at least to 3 different sites, but they're all hosted on the same system. So suddenly there's 3 stories that are really popular. And keeping that difference means that you have to be able to make the cache do funny things. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you've ditched Drupal now, what is the solution at the moment? Is it another custom one, or where are you now?
We are using Python and Django. So we've actually, I don't really want to turn this into a Django talk for obvious reasons, but we've got we've written a Django module which we call Drupal Glue, and we are actually still using the admin functionality in Drupal. The 2% that I mentioned are basically mostly admin pages. So the admin systems we created in Drupal we are still running. And what we actually have is, in our load balancer, we have a set of regular expressions that say, this is in Varnish, if the URL looks like this, send it to this port on this host. If it looks like this, send it to this host on that port. And if it looks like this other host on that port. And that allows us to, if you're browsing around the site, you won't notice it unless you're someone who works there who knows the telltale signs that make you go, oh, look at that. So it's that's worked for us, but yeah.
Yeah, so ultimately the database and everything in the background is still the same as it was.
We've actually managed to keep the same database since 2002.
That's kind of impressive.
Yeah. Primary keys actually was a big one with that. The first developers decided that you could have primary keys across multiple columns, which was a great idea back then when everybody was writing their own systems. You don't have to assign a random number to something to keep it unique. But as you start using more and more general purpose systems, you need to have a unique ID for every row. So that caused us to have to start getting creative. So basically we have a bunch of tables that have what's effectively 2 primary keys. One is 2 columns together and the extra one that Drupal uses. If you ever do database replication, you're probably going to have to do the same thing. We use PostgreSQL. When you use Sloaney, you need to have a unique ID for every row. So same thing. That forced us to do it. But yeah, that was fun to add in. Anybody else? Yeah.
When you talked about content editing,
Yes.
how did you train everyone to hop on a system, and what content editor did you use in Drupal? Because we find that you can train a client, but they do unusual things when they get into a content editor.
What we've actually done is use the same method we've been using even before Drupal, and we have our own little markup language that is basically using double square brackets to send a command like link to another article.
Like Markdown.
Yeah, we call it sludge, but it's a very similar concept to Markdown. We found that using that forces people to do the right thing. We did not want journalists to make things bold, make things red, make things big, make things small. We're actually quite scared of that. We want to try and keep as much of the content the same. When they need that sort of modification, usually it's a very specific purpose. So for example, one of the ones that was coming up was they would say, well, when I write a 10-page review on the differences between these 2 systems, I want to have subheadings. So I want to have them in a different color. So what we actually ended up doing was creating a new markup tag for that says, okay, these are my subheadings. And that also means that now they're in a easily modifiable form. I can pull them out. I can put a table of contents at the start automatically. When I'm displaying this story on a mobile device, I can deal with it differently. And when I am importing this onto an iPad app, I can again do something different. So not having actual markup that was real HTML made our lives easier. That being said, we get a lot of articles from overseas as well, and they often have markup in them. So you do what you can. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Anyone else? No? Great. Well, thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. There's apparently a feedback form, which I tried to find a link for but couldn't. But it exists. And there's also a generic conference feedback form, I believe.
I believe so too.
Which you should all try and use so that everyone can learn from this. And yeah, thank you.
Everyone say thanks to Pascal. Yeah, mate.
Thank you.